Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a royal title must be in want of a wife. But what, dear reader, is one to do when said royal has the audacity to place Mozart as the arbiter of his matrimonial future? Our tale begins, as many great scandals do, in London during the height of the season, when the ambitious mothers of marriageable daughters sharpen their wits like generals before battle. Prince Nicholas of Kensington, a small but prosperous principality near the border of Wales that most cartographers conveniently forget to include on their maps, had arrived in London with the explicit purpose of finding a bride. At 30 years of age, he was what the matchmaking mamas of the ton called ripe for picking, and what their daughters secretly referred to as deliciously mature behind fluttering fans. The prince was handsome in that aristocratic way, tall, with an aquiline nose that suggested generations of careful breeding, eyes the color of expensive brandy, and a smile that made debutantes swoon from Mayfair to Chelsea. His hair, the color of polished mahogany, was always impeccably styled, as were his clothes, which came from the finest tailors in London. "He is perfection," declared Lady Harrington to the Dowager Countess of Wellmere during a particularly tedious musicale. "And he has a palace." "A palace? Yes, but in Kensington," replied the Dowager with a dismissive wave of her fan. "Hardly the royal courts of Europe." "My dear Countess," Lady Harrington leaned in, lowering her voice to a whisper that could nonetheless be heard 3 rows back. "When one's daughter is 23 and still unwed, one cannot be particular about the exact location of the palace." The Dowager sniffed. "I suppose not." What neither of these distinguished ladies knew, dear reader, was that Prince Nicholas had a peculiar condition for his bride-to-be. While most men of his station might desire beauty, breeding, or a substantial dowry, the prince had but one requirement, one that he had declared to his secretary just that morning. "If she plays Mozart, I shall marry her," he proclaimed, standing by the window of his rented townhouse on Grosvenor Square. "I am weary of simpering misses who murder Chopin and butcher Bach. Give me a woman who can properly interpret Mozart, and I shall make her a princess before the season ends." His secretary, a long-suffering man named Mr. Hastings, merely sighed and added this criterion to the already lengthy list of qualities the prince desired in a bride. The proclamation might have remained private had not the prince's valet been listening at the door, as good servants always do, for how else would the ton's gossip circulate with such efficiency? By afternoon tea, every drawing-room in Mayfair buzzed with the news that Prince Nicholas would marry any lady who could play Mozart to his satisfaction. "Mozart!" Lady Fernsby exclaimed, nearly choking on her tea cake. "My Georgiana has been practicing Beethoven these 6 months. Quick, child, to the pianoforte. We must remedy this immediately." All across London, pianoforte teachers found themselves summoned at ungodly hours. Daughters were scolded for their insufficient dedication to Austrian composers, and sheet music bearing Mozart's name was purchased in quantities that suggested either a sudden cultural renaissance or, more accurately, the desperation of the marriage market. Meanwhile, at the residence of the widowed Mrs. Adelaide Ashton, a very different scene unfolded. Mrs. Ashton, once the belle of 3 counties before an imprudent marriage to a charming but penniless gentleman had removed her from society's highest circles, now maintained a modest but respectable household with her daughter, Olivia. Olivia Ashton was what polite society called a handsome woman. Code, as we all know, for a lady whose beauty did not quite meet the current standard of ethereal delicacy, but who possessed enough pleasing features to avoid being labeled unfortunate. At 24, she was dangerously close to being firmly on the shelf, a fact her mother lamented with increasing frequency. "I despair, Olivia," Mrs. Ashton sighed, collapsing dramatically onto the settee in their small but tastefully appointed drawing-room. "Lady Hartwick's girl is barely 17 and already has 3 offers. Meanwhile you refuse to simper, giggle, or pretend an interest in hunting tales," Olivia suggested, not looking up from her book. "Precisely," her mother threw up her hands. "Is it so difficult to feign interest? To smile at a gentleman's jest, even when it is as dull as dishwater? To play the pianoforte with just enough skill to impress, but not enough to intimidate?" Olivia closed her book with a sigh. "Mother, I do not wish to marry a man who desires a simpering fool for a wife. No one said anything about marriage being sensible, Mrs. Ashton retorted. Now, have you heard the latest? That handsome prince from Kensington has declared he'll marry any woman who can play Mozart to his satisfaction. Mozart? At least there's that. You do play beautifully. Olivia's mouth quirked in a half-smile. I doubt the prince will be attending any musicales where I might perform. Besides, I have no desire to be a princess. No desire to be. Mrs. Ashton looked as though she might faint. Olivia and Ashton, sometimes I wonder if you are truly my daughter. No desire to be a princess? What sensible woman would say such a thing? One who values her independence and has seen too many unhappy marriages among the nobility? Olivia suggested. Mrs. Ashton waved away this inconvenient logic. Independence is all well and good until one's funds run dry. Remember, my dear, I will not live forever, and this house goes to your cousin Frederick upon my death. This sobering reminder silenced Olivia. Her mother, though prone to dramatics, spoke the truth. Their circumstances, while comfortable now, hung by the thread of her mother's lifetime interest in their modest home. Once Mrs. Ashton departed this world, Olivia would be at the mercy of a cousin who had already made clear his disinterest in supporting female relations. I shall think on it, mother, she conceded, though with little enthusiasm. Had our story ended there, dear reader, it would have been a dreadfully dull affair, with Olivia either surrendering to societal expectations or fading into the obscurity of spinsterhood. Fortunately for us all, fate, that master playwright, had a rather more entertaining third act in mind. The very next morning, disaster struck the residence of Prince Nicholas. His housekeeper, Mrs. Pennyworth, a woman whose efficiency was matched only by her formidable appearance, announced her immediate departure after discovering the prince's valet had been pilfering the household silver. I cannot work in a house where theft occurs under my nose, Your Highness, she declared, her chin raised with the dignity of the deeply offended. It reflects poorly on my management. The prince, who relied heavily on Mrs. Pennyworth's meticulous oversight of his domestic affairs, was distraught. But Mrs. Pennyworth, how shall I manage? I have invitations to 3 balls this week alone, and the Duchess of Wyndham's dinner tomorrow. I cannot possibly interview new staff while maintaining my social obligations. Mrs. Pennyworth, slightly mollified by his evident distress, sniffed thoughtfully. I may know of someone. A temporary solution, mind you. Mrs. Ashton's girl, Olivia, a gentlewoman fallen on hard times. She has assisted me before when I've needed extra hands for grand dinners. Very capable, if a bit independent-minded. The prince, desperate and with no alternative presenting itself, agreed to this arrangement. And so it was that Olivia Ashton, daughter of a gentleman and granddaughter of a baronet, found herself serving as temporary housekeeper to Prince Nicholas of Kensington. It is only for a fortnight, mother, Olivia assured Mrs. Ashton, who looked positively faint at the idea of her daughter engaging in paid labor. And the compensation is generous. We can replace the drawing-room curtains and perhaps even afford new gloves for the winter. But what if someone sees you? What will people say? They already say I am a spinster with peculiar notions, Olivia replied with a pragmatic shrug. This will merely confirm their opinion. The prince was not present when Olivia arrived at his Grosvenor Square residence the following morning, dressed in a simple gray gown of good quality but no particular fashion. Mrs. Pennyworth, still present to oversee the transition, led her through the house, explaining the prince's particular habits and preferences. His Highness is most particular about his morning chocolate, not too sweet, with just a hint of cinnamon. He takes breakfast at precisely 9 o'clock, unless he has returned late from an evening engagement, in which case it is served at 10. His shirts must be starched exactly so, she demonstrated with her hands, and his evening clothes prepared by 4 o'clock each day. Olivia listened attentively, mentally cataloging the prince's numerous preferences and wondering what sort of man required such specific attendance. Spoiled and entitled, no doubt, like most of the aristocracy. When Mrs. Pennyworth finally departed, Olivia found herself alone in the grand townhouse, save for the footman, cook, and various other servants who regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and skepticism. She squared her shoulders and set to work, determined to prove herself equal to the task. The prince returned late that afternoon, striding into the house with the confident air of a man accustomed to commanding attention. Olivia, who was reviewing the household accounts in the small study adjacent to the main hall, heard his arrival but did not immediately present herself. After all, she was not a servant to come running at his entrance. It was only when the butler, Hopkins, appeared at the study door that she looked up. His Highness wishes to meet the new housekeeper, Hopkins announced with the gravity of a man delivering news of national importance. Olivia nodded, set aside her pen, and followed Hopkins to the drawing room, where Prince Nicholas stood warming himself by the fire. She curtsied, not the deep obeisance of a servant, but the respectful acknowledgment of a woman of breeding to a man of rank. "Your Highness," she said, her voice clear and composed. "I am Olivia Ashton. I will be overseeing your household until a permanent replacement for Mrs. Pennyworth can be found." The prince turned, and Olivia had her first proper look at the man who had sent half of London's eligible ladies scrambling for Mozart sonatas. He was, she had to admit, rather handsome, with features that spoke of good breeding and intelligence. His eyes, a warm amber brown, assessed her with evident surprise. "Miss Ashton," he said after a moment, "you are younger than I expected. I assure you, Your Highness, my age does not affect my competence." A smile flickered at the corner of his mouth. "I'm certain it does not. Mrs. Pennyworth spoke highly of your capabilities. She is kind to say so." "She is never kind without cause," the prince replied, his smile widening slightly. "I trust you've been acquainted with the household routines?" "I have. Your chocolate will be prepared with cinnamon, your shirts will be starched to military precision, and your evening clothes will await you daily at 4 o'clock precisely." Was that amusement in his eyes? "I see Mrs. Pennyworth was thorough in her instructions." "Exceedingly so." The prince nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Very well, Miss Ashton. I leave my domestic comfort in your capable hands." With that, he dismissed her, politely, but unmistakably, and Olivia returned to the household accounts, puzzled by the encounter. The prince had been neither as haughty nor as demanding as she had anticipated. In fact, he had seemed almost normal. It was most disconcerting. The next several days established a routine. Olivia managed the household with quiet efficiency, avoiding the prince when possible and maintaining a professional distance when they did interact. For his part, Prince Nicholas seemed content with this arrangement, offering no complaints about her management. It was on the 5th day of her employment that the incident occurred, the one that would, as these things inevitably do, change the course of our tale entirely. The prince had departed for his club, and the house was quiet. Olivia, having completed her immediate duties, found herself drawn to the music room. A beautiful pianoforte stood in the center, its polished wood gleaming in the afternoon light. She approached it hesitantly, running her fingers lightly over the keys. It had been weeks since she had played. Their own instrument at home was a tired old thing, badly in need of tuning. This magnificent specimen, with its perfect ivory keys and rich resonance, was irresistible. She sat down, adjusting her skirts, and began to play, softly at first, then with growing confidence as her fingers remembered their training. Mozart's sonata in C major filled the room, her interpretation both technically precise and emotionally nuanced. She lost herself in the music, forgetting her surroundings, her position, everything except the beauty of the composition. So absorbed was she that she failed to notice the prince's return, failed to hear his footsteps pause outside the music room, failed to sense his presence as he stood in the doorway, transfixed by the sight of his temporary housekeeper playing with the skill of a concert performer. It was only when she finished the piece, the final notes hanging in the air like delicate crystal, that she became aware of her audience. She turned, startled, to find Prince Nicholas watching her with an expression of utter astonishment. "Your Highness." She stood quickly, her cheeks flushing. "I apologize for the liberty." "You play Mozart," he said, his voice strangely quiet. "Ah, yes. I was trained as a girl." "Again, I apologize for." "No." He stepped into the room, his gaze intense. "Do not apologize. That was extraordinary. I have never heard that sonata played with such understanding." Olivia blinked, caught off guard by the compliment. "Thank you, Your Highness. Mozart has always been a particular favorite of mine." "Mine as well." He moved closer, studying her with new interest. "Where did you learn to play like that?" My grandmother insisted on the finest music master in the county, she replied, uncomfortably aware that she had overstepped her position. Before my father's investments failed, of course. The prince nodded slowly, as if piecing together a puzzle. Miss Ashton, are you aware of a certain condition I recently established regarding my search for a bride? Oh heavens! The Mozart proclamation. Olivia felt her flush deepen. I may have heard something to that effect, Your Highness. And yet you did not mention your proficiency when you took this position. It hardly seemed relevant to the proper starching of your shirts, she replied, a hint of her natural spirit breaking through her embarrassment. To her surprise, the prince laughed, a warm, genuine sound that transformed his face. No, I suppose it wouldn't be. He gestured to the pianoforte. Would you play something else? Please. It was the please that did it, so unexpected from a man of his rank. Olivia hesitated only briefly before returning to the instrument. This time, she chose Mozart's Fantasy in D minor, her fingers dancing over the keys with practiced grace. When she finished, she found the prince standing much closer, his expression one of undisguised admiration. Miss Ashton, he said, his voice low and serious. I believe we need to have a conversation that has nothing whatsoever to do with household management. And so began, dear reader, the most unusual courtship in the annals of the ton. For Prince Nicholas, true to his word, if somewhat unconventional in his methods, began to pursue his housekeeper with the determination of a man who had found something rare and precious. Of course, it was not that simple. Nothing worth having ever is, particularly when one is a prince and the other is employed in one's household. The very next day, Olivia tendered her resignation. I cannot remain in your employ, Your Highness, she declared firmly, standing before his desk with perfect posture. It would be inappropriate. Because I admired your playing, he countered, leaning back in his chair with an expression that suggested he found her objection amusing. Because you are looking for a bride who plays Mozart, and I played Mozart, and now there is an awkwardness. I see no awkwardness, only opportunity. Olivia narrowed her eyes. Your Highness, if you are suggesting. I am suggesting nothing improper, Miss Ashton, he interrupted, his expression growing serious. I am merely pointing out that I made a declaration. I would marry the woman who could play Mozart to my satisfaction. You have done so. The fact that you were temporarily managing my household at the time seems a minor detail. A minor? Olivia stared at him in disbelief. Your Highness, I am not a candidate for marriage. I am a gentleman's daughter with no dowry, no connections, and now, a history of domestic employment. The ton would be scandalized. The prince rose from his chair, circling the desk to stand before her. Miss Ashton, do you know why I made that ridiculous proclamation about Mozart? She shook her head, suddenly aware of how tall he was, how the afternoon light caught the warm tones in his hair. Because I have spent 3 seasons watching young ladies pretend to be what they think I want. They feign interests they do not have, affect mannerisms that are not their own, and laugh at jests they do not find amusing. I am surrounded by performances, but never authenticity. And then, his voice softened. I hear you play. Not for my benefit, not to impress or entice, but simply for the joy of the music. Do you have any idea how rare that is? Olivia swallowed, finding it suddenly difficult to maintain her composure. Your Highness. Nicholas, he corrected gently. My name is Nicholas. I cannot call you that. You can if I give you permission. And I do. She shook her head, taking a step back. This is madness. You know nothing about me. I know you play Mozart with your soul. I know you manage a household with quiet efficiency. I know you speak your mind, even to a prince. These are not insignificant insights into your character. They are hardly sufficient basis for marriage. Of course not, he agreed readily. Which is why I propose a compromise. Remain as my housekeeper for the originally agreed-upon fortnight. During that time, we shall become better acquainted. If, at the end of those 2 weeks, you find me intolerable, you may leave with excellent references and the generous compensation we agreed upon. If, however, you find me at all agreeable. He left the sentence hanging, his eyes warm with possibility. It was reckless. It was improper. It was exactly the sort of situation that led to ruined reputations and scandalized whispers behind fans. And yet, Olivia found herself nodding. 2 weeks, she agreed. But I maintained my resignation at the end of that period, regardless of the outcome of our acquaintance. The prince, Nicholas, smiled, the expression transforming his face from merely handsome to something that made Olivia's heart perform a most undignified flutter. Agreed, he said, extending his hand as if to seal a business arrangement. After a moment's hesitation, Olivia placed her hand in his. Instead of shaking it, however, he raised it to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles that was entirely proper in form, but somehow deeply intimate in execution. I look forward to our acquaintance, Miss Ashton. What followed was the strangest fortnight of Olivia's life. By day, she continued to manage the prince's household, overseeing meals and linens, and all the mundane details of domestic life. But in the evenings, when the servants had retired and the house grew quiet, she would join Nicholas in the library or music room for conversation. They spoke of books they had read, places they had visited or wished to visit, philosophies they admired, and music they loved. He told her of the pressures of ruling a small principality, of navigating court politics, of his desire to implement educational reforms for his subjects. She shared stories of her childhood, of her father's gentle scholarly nature, of her mother's determination to maintain their place in society despite diminished circumstances. On the third evening, he asked her to play for him again. This time, she chose a Mozart concerto arranged for pianoforte, her fingers dancing across the keys with a confidence born of genuine skill. When she finished, she found him watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. "You are remarkable, Olivia Ashton," he said softly. "For playing the pianoforte?" she asked, attempting lightness despite the sudden warmth in her cheeks. "For being exactly who you are, without artifice or pretense." On the fifth evening, they played chess. Olivia proved a formidable opponent, winning 2 games out of 3. Nicholas declared himself delighted to find a worthy adversary, while Olivia tried, and failed, not to be charmed by his genuine pleasure in her victory. On the 7th evening, he asked about her family. "My father died when I was 16, she told him, seated in a comfortable chair by the library fire. "Investment's gone wrong, I'm afraid. A common enough tale. My mother has done her best to maintain our position, but with limited resources. It must have been difficult," he observed, his expression thoughtful. "Less difficult than for many. We still have a roof over our heads, food on our table. But yes, certain doors closed to us. Certain opportunities vanished. Like marriage to a suitable gentleman?" Olivia smiled wryly. "I was never particularly sought after, even before our circumstances changed. Too bookish, too opinionated, too tall. Too perfect," he countered, his gaze holding hers across the space between them. On the 10th evening, they walked in the garden behind the townhouse, a small, private space sheltered from neighboring eyes by high walls and strategic plantings. The night was cool but clear, stars visible despite London's perpetual haze. "Have you decided yet?" Nicholas asked as they strolled along a gravel path between neatly trimmed hedges. "Decided what? Whether I am intolerable or agreeable." Olivia laughed softly. "I'm reserving judgment until the full fortnight has elapsed." "A cautious approach." "A prudent one," she corrected. "You are, after all, a prince accustomed to getting his way. 2 weeks is hardly enough time to determine whether your current interest is genuine or merely the novelty of pursuit." He stopped walking, turning to face her with unexpected seriousness. "Do you truly believe that? That my interest is mere novelty?" Olivia faltered, caught off guard by his directness. "I don't know what to believe. This entire situation is so far removed from normal experience." "Then allow me to be perfectly clear." He took her hand, his touch warm even through her gloves. "My interest in you, Olivia Ashton, has nothing to do with novelty and everything to do with the woman you are. Intelligent, principled, talented, and possessed of a beauty that grows more compelling with each passing day. Nicholas, I am falling in love with you," he continued, his voice low and intent. "Not with the idea of you, not with some fantasy of a perfect princess, but with you, the woman who plays Mozart with her soul and challenges me at chess and speaks her mind without fear or favor." Olivia stood frozen, her heart pounding so loudly she was certain he must hear it. "This is madness," she whispered. "You are a prince. I am the woman I want by my side. If you'll have me." Before she could respond, he bent his head and kissed her, gently at first, Then with growing passion as she responded, her free hand coming up to rest against his chest. When they finally parted, both were breathless. "I should slap you for that liberty," she murmured, making no move to step away. "I would deserve it," he agreed, his thumb tracing circles on her palm. "Will you?" "Not tonight, I think." She smiled up at him, feeling reckless and lightheaded and more alive than she had ever felt before. "But I reserve the right to do so tomorrow if I decide you've taken advantage." He laughed, the sound warm in the cool night air. "Fair enough." On the 14th day, the final day of their agreement, Olivia awoke with a sense of impending loss that surprised her with its intensity. She had known from the beginning that this interlude was temporary, that she would return to her mother's modest home, and the prince would continue his search for a suitable bride among the daughters of the Tun. And yet, somewhere during those 2 weeks of conversation and music and chess and shared confidences, she had allowed herself to hope. It was foolish, she knew. Even if Nicholas truly did harbor feelings for her, the obstacles to a match between them were formidable. His council would expect a bride of rank and fortune. Society would whisper about the prince who married his housekeeper. Her own mother would likely swoon from shock before rallying to boast of her daughter's elevation. She went about her duties with particular attention that day, ensuring everything was in perfect order before her departure. The household accounts were balanced and recorded. The menus for the coming week were planned. The linens were inventoried, the silver polished, the servants' schedules arranged. It was late afternoon when she finally returned to her small room to pack her few belongings. She had just closed her valise when there was a knock at the door. "Come in," she called, expecting one of the maids. Instead, it was Nicholas who entered, looking uncharacteristically nervous. "Your Highness," she said formally, curtsying as protocol demanded. "I've completed all the necessary arrangements for the household. The new housekeeper Mrs. Pennyworth recommended should arrive tomorrow morning." "Hang the new housekeeper," he said with unprincely bluntness. "That's not why I'm here." Olivia raised an eyebrow, waiting. Nicholas took a deep breath, then reached into his pocket and withdrew a small object. "I came to give you this." He held out his hand, revealing a ring, a simple but elegant band of gold set with a single perfect sapphire. "It was my grandmother's," he said quietly. "She was a music teacher before she married my grandfather. Everyone thought it a terrible mésalliance at the time, but they were deliriously happy for 43 years. Olivia stared at the ring, then at him, her heart in her throat. "Nicholas, I said I would marry the woman who could play Mozart to my satisfaction," he reminded her, his voice gentle. "What I didn't say was that I was looking for someone who would also challenge my intellect, make me laugh, see me as a man rather than just a title, and make me want to be worthy of her regard." He stepped closer, taking her hand. "I love you, Olivia Ashton. I want you as my wife, my princess, my partner in all things. Will you marry me?" For a long moment, Olivia couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the reality of what was happening. Then, slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, I will marry you." The ring slid onto her finger as if it had been made for her. Nicholas pulled her into his arms, his kiss a promise of all that was to come. Needless to say, dear reader, the announcement of the engagement between Prince Nicholas of Kensington and Miss Olivia Ashton, a gentleman's daughter of modest means who had briefly served as his housekeeper, caused the precise scandal one might expect. The Tun was abuzz with speculation, outrage, and reluctant admiration. "A housekeeper," Lady Harrington exclaimed, her fan working overtime. "It's unprecedented." "I hear she plays Mozart divinely," the Dowager Countess of Wellmere replied with surprising equanimity. "And she is a gentleman's daughter, after all, not entirely unsuitable. But still, to marry a woman who scrubbed his floors. I rather doubt a prince's housekeeper does much floor scrubbing, my dear," the Dowager observed dryly. "And love matches, while unconventional, have been known to occur even among the highest circles." The wedding took place 3 months later in the chapel at Kensington Palace. Olivia, radiant in a gown of ivory silk with sapphires at her throat and wrists, walked down the aisle on the arm of her cousin Frederick, who had suddenly discovered a great fondness for his previously overlooked relation. Mrs. Ashton, resplendent in new finery and importance, wept decorously into a lace handkerchief. Prince Nicholas, waiting at the altar, watched his bride approach with an expression of such evident adoration that even the most cynical observers were moved. And when the bride and groom exchanged their vows, their voices were clear and certain, their eyes never leaving each other's faces. The reception that followed featured, among other entertainments, a performance by the new Princess of Kensington. Seated at the pianoforte in her wedding finery, Princess Olivia played Mozart's Sonata in C major, the very piece that had begun their unusual courtship. As the final notes faded, her husband bent to kiss her hand, whispering something that made her laugh with delight. Later, much later, when the guests had departed and the newlyweds retired to their chambers, Nicholas took his wife in his arms and smiled down at her. "Did I ever tell you," he murmured, "that the day I heard you play was the day I knew my ridiculous proclamation had actually worked? If you play Mozart, I'll marry you," I said, never expecting to find someone who truly understood the music as I did. Olivia smiled up at him, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. "And what the cleaning lady did left you speechless?" "Absolutely speechless," he confirmed, bending to kiss her. "And eternally grateful." And so, dear reader, ends our tale of the prince and the housekeeper, the man who sought authenticity and the woman who played Mozart with her soul. They went on, history tells us, to rule Kensington with wisdom and compassion, to raise 3 children with love and laughter, and to play duets at the pianoforte well into their golden years. For in the end, it is not titles or fortunes that make a match, but the harmony of 2 hearts playing in perfect accord. Even, perhaps especially, when one of those hearts belongs to a woman who was, however briefly, a most extraordinary cleaning lady.